and the consumer buys or doesn't buy. That's the only way that I can decipher what's going on. I see ads on TV. There are programs that I can participate. Unilever was one with the soybeans, and they had an ad campaign that we saw in this TV market. And so that we did get 10 cents a bushel on our soybeans if we sold them in a certain delivery point. And that program has just changed, and they're not willing to pay that 10 cents. We can still partake in the program, but we won't be paid anything. And so the message to me is that consumers don't care. So I have to believe then that it doesn't matter. And so I believe that the consumers have to choose with their spending dollars in the pitter-patter of their feet, either into or out of a store that says, I want this product. Yes, it might be more expensive, but that's the product I want. If I know that, then I can produce for that market. So right now, exactly as Bill has said, this industrial model says produce as much as I can. And why is the consumer complaining? They're getting exactly what they want. They're buying the product that's on the shelf.
Fair enough. I would like to turn it over to all of you if there are questions. And I think Dr. Trish has a mic.
You'll need to speak into the microphone. Is this working? Oh, I'll try to find another.
Well, Andy's ready to shout, so shout.
So when we're talking about markets, I think we all have to be on the same page in that agricultural markets, especially for the commodities that we produce here in Iowa, are most assuredly not a free market. The government really has dictated what is grown in Iowa through, right now it used to be direct subsidies to the farmers, and now it's federally subsidized crop insurance. And we also have pretty much all of the markets that exist for corn and soybeans all came out of our land-grant colleges. So if you think corn-based ethanol, you think about pretty much all of the products that we make with these commodities, it came out of some government money. And so the public policy aspect of it, if we want to see some diversification in the landscape, it's probably going to take a similar push from the government to make it happen. Can I hear what you all have to say about that?
Sure, you're exactly right. When we work with FSA, if we would do vegetables, we are foregoing any acres of vegetables, including sweet corn, do not participate in the farm program per se. If we would continue to do that, then those acres would actually come off our base acres. So we live and die by what we call base acres. If anybody wants to know more about that, see me later type of thing. It's complicated. Our base acres today that we file on were created in the 1980s. So Andy exactly points that out. If you abandon those base acres, then you are exiting the farm program as we know it. Now, that's okay if you have a good plan. But if you're going to want to participate or might participate down the road, you may have trouble getting back in. So, which highlights something else. CRP is touted to be, for those conservation reserve program, you can put acres into it and get it planted to a native species or other today. And you'll get a payment. You don't have to do anything except do some mid-contract management, blah, blah, blah. So we had a 32 or 34 million acre cap. That's now changed to 24 million acres, and we're at the cap. How you be eligible for CRP is only if you're in a row crop, and you have to be in a designated row crop, program crop, for specific years. So you own this piece of property you want it in, it's too rough to farm, but the only way you can get it in is to grow row crops that we don't want you to grow. So policy is absolutely driving this. It has since the New Deal came out. So at the same program in 2006, we had Carl Zoloff spoke about how that food policy was, or farm program policy was designed to balance rural income and urban income, and in 2006, after 70 years, it had achieved that goal. So that was wonderful, and then in 2006 we got an RFS, and all of a sudden we didn't have enough corn, we needed more, and prices went crazy, and here we are today at the other end of that spectrum. We have supplied that market that supplies ethanol and our food requirements. So very much that is a policy.
A couple comments on your question, and certainly appreciate it. A couple things as a student, mostly of watching farm bills and being now involved in a variety of farm bills, particularly focusing on conservation, and we've been very active in DC on that, and we could talk about some of the programs that have evolved. But in 1996, we had the Freedom to Farm policy, which was a vision in many ways to wean off the farm engagement. And what I would say is I sometimes characterize it this way. There's about a third of our ag leaders that would love agriculture to get out of, or the federal government to get out of the way, because it kind of keeps everybody there's no blue sky. If you're a true market person, you want blue sky, right?
Correct.
So what happened in 1996, and they did that when prices were pretty good. Then prices went down. And we were going to have, and then they had to pass disaster payments to basically save it, because, who has the stomach for losing half the farmers? We don't have as many farmers as we used to have. And then are we going to let these other half just go? And that became the dilemma. Mm-hmm. So then we can't just do it every year, pass a disaster program. So you had things like, that's when CSP started being talked about. And if you go back to the first farm bill, which by the way was unconstitutional the first time around, and when they came back and rewrote it, it had conservation as a foundation. It was the Dust Bowl era, and we saw the public TV program on that. But it was compelling to put federal taxpayer investment into conservation so that society got something back, right? And I would argue conservation compliance, which is quasi-regulatory. It's not, I don't know you would call that regulatory or not, but if you don't comply, then you lose your farm program benefits. But anyway, I don't know the answer. I can tell you we advocate for a strong farm bill. And we think that farmers truly get paid through the research title, through the trade title, through the conservation title. You know, there's a whole raft of titles in that farm bill. And there's return on investment. Now, one last thing I want to say about this is that I have the attitude that I don't want Washington, D.C. I don't want to be subservient to Washington, D.C. I want to take on these issues ourselves. I'm a water guy. I'm a watershed guy. I envision an Iowa that takes control of these issues and owns them. We need more vibrancy in our landscape. We'd agree with that, probably. I think. Well, you don't have to say, but.
I'm not, Roger.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm just having fun. It's not acceptable to me to rely on Washington, D.C. and Des Moines to solve this problem. We need to do this in local communities. We need to own these issues. We should be writing watershed plans up and down the Raccoon River watershed, not 2 or 3. We need local leadership. You and I in this room should be sitting down and writing a watershed plan. And there's some going on here, right?
Yes.
And there's more today than there was 5 years ago. It's not enough. But Washington will not solve this problem. If I had to predict this administration, and I don't know how this resonates with the next presentation, but we may see a reorganization of USDA. It may be way different soon. I think I've read that. You know, FSA, NRCS combined. Well, is that a good thing? So the solutions to water issues are local. They're site-specific. They involve technology, leadership, engagement, upstream and downstream working together. They're shared issues.
Well, the idea that agriculture, or an element of agriculture that Roger represents, wants Washington and Des Moines out of this problem is why we have this problem. We're talking about a public commodity. We're talking about the waters of the state, the waters of the U.S. That isn't going to be resolved by individuals seeking their own self-interest. That's resolved by regulation. That's resolved by at least tying public dollars to a public outcome. Farm bill, trade policy at the national level, wow, we can spend a lot of time on that. I will just throw out a couple numbers. One, Iowa got about $1 billion, Iowa farmers got about $1 billion in USDA money the last year that was reported, 2015. That, in my view, has not been tied with conservation practices. If you're going to take that money, it's more than take that money and get great flood insurance so you can plant more corn and soybeans in areas that flood so we can incent more of that bad behavior and have more contaminants in our rivers. Let me parallel that with what's going on at the state level. Governor Reynolds, the first piece of legislation that she signed just last week is a water quality bill. The only thing water quality about the bill is it was in the title. It ignores watershed and science associated with watersheds, and it sprinkles money, your tax money, around the state that's coming from the general fund, coming from sales tax on drinking water that previously went into the general fund, is now being sprinkled around for Bill Northey and others to have ribbon cuttings on biofilters or wherever it may be across the state. No tie to specific measurements and requirements. So we have an kind of an atomized farm policy that throws a lot of money a lot of different places, but does not tie it to a public health need. The Farm Bill and trade policies both can take us closer to that, but again, the point is this: we're operating under a model for the most part that says more production is good. Well, more production is not good for the environment, it's not good for our economy, and it's not good for local communities. It is not sustainable, and you're paying for that.
Is the mic working?
It's not, but if.
Okay,
people-
I'll repeat the question, or you can speak loudly and I'll repeat it.
So, I'm a local farmer, I also used to be a contractor, and I worked for a lot of row crop farmers during that time, about 80% of my business came from row crop farmers. Now I have a small, sustainable, hog farm, and more in the way that people used to raise hogs versus how they are now climate. But I guess I'd like to hear, from my perspective, I guess the real problem is something that's been mentioned a little bit, but it really has to do with many of the problems in this country, which is basically big business having their finger on everything. And from having worked with a lot of row crop farmers very closely before, some of my best friends are row crop farmers, I think it's sad, and I think we're all kind of being victimized by these corporations because you have people that have had family farms for hundreds of years and can't see a future in what they've been doing for a long time. And we have consumers and the public that are not being educated about what's in their food, and they're also really being exposed to a lot of toxins in their environment that they might not even be aware of. And I feel like that's all being basically perpetrated on us by large corporations such as Monsanto. I'm not trying to sing about Monsanto, there's a lot of them. But, you know, farms are getting larger and larger, and they're starting to buy up the land and all this stuff. And I'd just like to hear a little bit of opinions about that. I feel like really
It's a great question, and a population that another kind of piece of this that we haven't directly discussed. So the influence of corporate interests and big business on farmers and in agriculture, and comments on that, or
At this moment in time, maybe the most hurt is on the largest farms. So at this moment, maybe that's a self-curing situation that we've got. But the resultant out of that I'm exposed to is that we have investor farmers showing up with money generated not inside agriculture, and in other states to our east, corporate agriculture is permitted. In Iowa, the Dakotas, Minnesota in particular, it is not legal for that corporate entity to physically farm. And so the other day, Kemin Industries was just permitted, I believe, to grow marijuana. And I believe that we might have just permitted corporate agriculture. And if